guys, welcome back to my channel. Simone here, and today I'm going to be doing another mental health video. Just a very quick one before I get into this video. I am hoping to do a Q&A video in a couple of weeks time as kind of one of my Sunday videos, and I'd love you to ask me some questions if you have anything. So obviously if I don't get any questions I just won't do the video, but hopefully you have some questions for me. It can be about anything. It can be about mental health, it can be about lockdown, it can be about life in general, it can be about books, anything at all, whatever you want to know. But please leave them in the description box. You can leave as many questions as you want, and I will get to them, and hopefully it'll be sort of towards the end of next week's video. That's the hope at the moment. But yeah, I just wanted to put that in there really quickly, because if you have any questions, then obviously, like I said, let me know. But today's video is going to be a reads and recommends video, which is one I haven't done in a really long time, and I wanted to talk about books with anxiety representation. Now, so what I've done in the past is I do 5 books I've read and 5 books that I've been recommended, and I talk about what they're about and also kind of what my thoughts are, and I don't know a massive amount about the anxiety representation in the recommended ones. I've heard that they are, according to Goodreads, they've been like shelved as anxiety books, or books with anxiety representation. However, obviously I don't know the specifics, but I wanted to do this video because I think it's really interesting, and I love talking about books with anxiety representation because I have anxiety myself. So yes, I wanted to do that today. So let's get started with the 5 books that I have already read. The first of them is one of my favourite non-fiction, kind of memoirs, I guess, and that is Educated by Tara Westover. This is one of my favourites because I just think that the way it's written and the story behind it seems so unreal, but it's actually a real person's life. And this follows Tara Westover growing up in a kind of family where basically her parents believe in the end of days, so they are kind of preparing for the end of days, and they, stocking up food. And I mean, these days we can all kind of, I think we can, have seen that around us. And it's very much, they don't believe in the government. Like, none of the children in her family have been registered, and they don't go to school. They are all homeschooled, and yeah, lots of things like that. And then it talks about what happens when Tara Westover decides that she wants to get an education, and she ends up going to Harvard, and yeah, amazing things that happen to her, and she does some amazing things. But she also talks a lot about mental health. She talks a lot about she was physically and emotionally abused in her family, and I think reading about her experiences and how she deals with her anxiety, and also the anxiety of not feeling good enough. Like, she went to Harvard after having come from a family that didn't want anything to do with, education, and she didn't feel like she belonged, and it was about her. It talks about her anxiety around that, and I absolutely loved it. I think this book everyone needs to read it. I do think that some people love this and some people hate it, but I just loved it, and it's one of my favourites, and it will always be. Next one I wanted to talk about is also a very controversial one, and that is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. This was one of my first books that had mental health representation when I started BookTube, and it was one of the first books I read because of BookTube, and I actually really enjoyed it at the time. It follows a boy and a girl, both of which meet on the clock tower at their school because they're both about to jump, and they essentially stop each other, and it's kind of about their relationship and then how they come to deal with it. I loved this book when I read it. Now, my concern is I don't know if I reread it if I would have the same opinions, because I've read so much since then, and I feel like it has that like 13 Reasons Why thing for me. Like, when I read it I really enjoyed it and it really helped me, but it's not necessarily good representation, if that makes any sense. I know a lot of people have a problem with All the Bright Places because they say that there's an issue of consent in there, and it also is the whole like the boy comes along and saves the day, or that kind of thing. But for me, the reason I loved it is because I felt like it spoke to the side of me that felt that way, and the side of me that had those to those thoughts and those feelings. And I did enjoy reading the book. Again, I don't know how much I would still enjoy it on a reread, but I definitely would potentially do that at some point just to see, because I think it's interesting when you're in kind of a negative mind space, or when you're in a kind of difficult situation, how much books can seem different than they are if you then read it later on. The next one I wanted to talk about is We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson. This is a book that on the surface, when you read it, doesn't necessarily come across in a kind of like anxiety way, if that makes sense. But it's very much an unfolding story. There's lots of things happening. This basically follows a boy who is visited by aliens, and they give him the option or the chance to press a button and essentially end the world. And he then has to decide, does he want that to happen? I believe his best friend or his boyfriend committed suicide, and it's then about him trying to figure out if the world is worth saving. And the anxiety representation in this, like I said, it initially seems like it could outwardly not be about mental health, but I think there's definite mental health elements to it, and I found it really, really fascinating. Just something that I wouldn't necessarily have read reading the synopsis, but because other people had said how much they enjoyed it, I then read it, and I also really enjoyed it. It's definitely a difficult one to swallow. There are a lot of trigger warnings for suicidal thoughts and for anxiety, depression, and there are lots of different things in here that you might struggle with if you are particularly triggered by these things. But I found it to be really interesting, and I did enjoy the read, and I'm glad that I read it. Next up is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a very different book than any of the others I've mentioned on this list. Sylvia Plath has written a lot of books, but this follows a girl who goes to a essentially psychiatric hospital after attempting to commit suicide. And I believe this is part biographical. I think it's partly autobiographical, of Sylvia Plath and the things that she's experienced. It was, again, a very tough book to read. I actually buddy read this one with Mary from Among Stories, or Mary Among Stories, and it was a wonderful reading experience, because although it's not my favourite book at all, what it talked about and what it did is definitely very successful, and I think that you probably would get a lot from it. Again, there's lots of trigger warnings for suicide, anxiety, depression, abuse, that kind of thing, that most of the books on this list have these similar triggers, to be honest. But I thought it was really well written. I just didn't necessarily connect to it. But I talked a lot in that buddy read with Mary, where we were talking about the fact that it's difficult when you feel like the reason that you're not connecting to a character is because of their mental illness. And it's hard to separate the two. And I think that's true in real life sometimes. It's difficult to separate the person with the mental illness if the mental illness causes them to have certain personality changes or that kind of thing. So yeah, again, this one was a good read. It wasn't necessarily one for me, but I think that you would enjoy it if you enjoy kind of the classic reads. Then the final one that I've read is The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer. This book has a lot of schizophrenic representation, but I do think there are anxiety elements to it as well. Again, this is a book that I found difficult to read initially. I buddy read this one as well with Kaz from Cats and Camera, and we had a really interesting discussion talking about this book. All of the details have not necessarily stuck with me, but I remember that it was very impactful, and that it's a book that I would recommend that you read if you haven't already read it. I think that it's also a very difficult one. There are, again, trigger warnings if you, content warning for schizophrenia and for anxiety, depression, suicide, many things, to be honest, but it was worth the read in my opinion. Then I want to talk about the 5 books that I have been recommended. The first of those is You Go Bernadette by Maria Semple, and I feel like I've heard a lot of people talk about this, but I've never really known too much about what it's about. I'm actually going to just read the synopsis from the computer behind you, because I've read the synopsis and I'm still not really sure that I totally know what it's about. It says, when her daughter B claims a family trip to Antarctica as a reward for perfect grades, Bernadette, a fiercely intelligent shut-in, throws herself into preparations for the trip. But worn down by years of trying to live the Seattle life she never wanted, Miss Fox is on the brink of a meltdown, and after a school fundraiser goes disastrously awry at her hands, she disappears, leaving her family to pick up the pieces, which is exactly what B does, weaving together an elaborate web of emails, invoices, and school memos that reveals a secret past Bernadette has been hiding for decades. Where'd You Go Bernadette is an ingenious and unabashedly entertaining novel about a family coming to terms with who they are and the power of a daughter's love for her mother. So that doesn't specifically say anything about like anxiety representation, but I've heard that it has really good representation for that, and I'm really intrigued by this. I still don't fully understand what it's about from reading the description, and I feel like it's one of those books that the more you read, the more you'll figure out. But yeah, it's a contemporary sort of mystery as far as I can tell, and it's definitely one I do really want to read, and I've added it to my wish list. Next up is a book that I actually have on my Kindle, and I very nearly read this for my mental health-athon TBR. I didn't end up reading it just because it didn't come up on the wheel in the end, but it was going to be my non-fiction pick. I ended up it is The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine N. Aron, and this is a non-fiction book, like a psychology book, I guess, and it follows, or it talks about the kind of personality trait of being a highly sensitive person, or what Elaine Aron calls a HSP. And this is kind of, it teaches you how to like recognize the trait of being a HSP in yourself, and then how you can use that to your advantage, and how you can understand yourself better, and then how you can use that to you know, deal with things. It just says, I'll just really quickly read the first little bit, not the whole back, but it says, do you have a keen imagination and vivid dreams? Is time alone each day as essential to you as food and water? Are you too shy or too sensitive according to others? Do noise and confusion quickly overwhelm you? If your answers are yes, you may be a highly sensitive person. And I'm really intrigued to read this. I've heard really good things about it, as again, like I said, this is a non-fiction, so it's definitely the one I think I might pick up at some point in the near future. As I said, I have it on my Kindle, so I do own it. But yeah, I've heard good things, and I think that if this can help people to understand, even if they're not necessarily the full like HSP as, you know, written, I think actually it could help smaller traits, like some of those things, it could help things, you know, people. So I'm really intrigued by it, and I definitely will read it soon. Next up is another book that I don't own yet, but I've heard good things about the author in particular. This is They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. I've not read an Adam Silvera book yet. I do have one on my sort of yearly TBR, which is More Happy Than Not, I think it's called, and I'm really interested to read any of his books, to be honest. They Both Die at the End is about two boys who I think it's in a world where when you find out like 24 hours before you're going to die that you're going to die, and then there's like a helpline or something where they set you up with somebody else who's also going to die in 24 hours, and you can spend the last 24 hours together and kind of realise all the things that you wanted to do. And I'm really excited by that. Again, they both die at the end. It kind of tells you what the ending will be. So I'm really interested to see how he does that, because that's obviously not going to be the surprise. So I'm interested to see how much I get invested in the characters. And I've heard great representation for anxiety. So definitely one that I am interested and intrigued by. The penultimate one is actually a graphic novel, and I've heard Emily and Charlie talk about this one a lot, and I really, really want to read it. It is Quiet Girl in a Noisy World by Debbie Tung. I believe Debbie Tung is the author of Book Love, which I've heard good things about as well. This, again, follows kind of stories of an introvert, I think, and I think it has lots of anxiety talk in it as well. I feel like I am quite an introvert at times. I don't really know what I would say. I'm definitely an introvert, but I couldn't say like on percentage levels and stuff, but I think this could be a really interesting one. Again, it's a graphic novel, so I feel like it's going to be a really nice and easy read, and just something that's a bit cozy as well. I am excited about this one, actually. I don't read enough graphic novels at all, so I'm really looking forward to actually being able to pick one up. And then the final one is actually one that I own, and that is The Girls by Emma Cline. This, I believe, is about Evie Boyd, who in the summer of 1969 meets the girls, and I think it's got something to do with the Manson or Charles Manson kind of cult and the murders that happened. I've heard mixed things about whether this actually is about that or if it has any kind of connection to it, because I feel like people said that there's not a lot of the Manson side of stuff in here, but I'm interested. And again, I think it talks about how Evie gets kind of sucked into it, and again, I think it has a lot of coming of age anxiety stuff in there as well, and I'm really interested actually. I think it could be fun. Like I said, I've heard very mixed things about this book, but I feel like with mental health books there is generally quite a mixed response, and I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that it depends who's reading it and what your life experience is, I guess, around books. So yeah, I can't wait to read this one. I'm hoping that it will come up at some point soon. I think this was on one of my TBRs last year and I didn't read it, or is it on one of my TBRs this year? I'm not really sure, but I do really want to get to this, and I'm intrigued. Although I really don't like this cover, I much prefer, is it the American cover or is this the American cover? I think this is the UK cover. Yeah, so I would love to see the other cover as well, because I think the US cover is much more pretty. So there you are, guys. That is my anxiety reads and recommends video. Let me know in the description box one book that you have read and one book that you haven't read that you believe has anxiety representation in. I would love to have your recommendations. And also let me know what your question is for me down below, because like I said, I'm hoping to do that video very soon. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I shall see you guys next time for another video. Bye guys, stay safe.